Welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. After learning a ton about kidney stones and helping people prevent stones at the University of Chicago, I was fed up with all the terrible advice people were finding online. So I decided to do something about it. The Kidney Dietitian was born. This podcast is for people who want to learn what actually works to prevent kidney stones and still enjoy life, eating, and their favorite foods. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the 122nd episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. As always, I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie Betts. And I wanted to dive into a question today that I've been getting more often, or kind of maybe this assumption that I'm hearing people have, and that is about vegetarian or vegan diets and kidney stones. I feel like there's a lot of information or advice out there that it is simply impossible to follow a vegetarian or vegan diet and have kidney stones, or that a vegan diet can give you kidney stones, or a vegetarian diet could give you kidney stones. And so I wanted to kind of dive into what the research says about these things, and see if it is in fact possible or beneficial even to follow a vegetarian or vegan diet and have kidney stones or not have kidney stones, right? So I want to just start out with a short answer in that it's absolutely possible to follow either a vegetarian or a fully vegan diet that avoids all animal products and not have kidney stones. I think just like any dietary pattern, if you do it the wrong way, if you will. I hate to say, make it as black and white as that and assign, right or wrong labels. But essentially, just like any diet, if you aren't mindful of certain aspects of nutrition, sure, a vegan diet could give you kidney stones, just like any diet, right? Like there's certainly things that we want to think about. And certainly when we dive into the realm of more plant-based nutrition, there are certainly specific aspects of nutrition that we want to be especially mindful of when it comes to kidney stone prevention. But I want to say that it is absolutely possible for you to follow a vegetarian or even fully vegan diet and not have kidney stones. In fact, I would argue that it is really beneficial. A vegetarian specifically diet, I would say, is probably just about the perfect diet that I can think of when it comes to kidney stone prevention. Maybe even vegetarian with fish. Like we'll say pescatarian now that I think about it. Like if I had to say the perfect, overall sort of public health message for not getting kidney stones, it would be a vegetarian diet that includes dairy, that includes some fish like a couple times a week as recommended, and that is probably the most perfect diet, if you will, when it comes to kidney stone prevention. Of course, also being mindful that we're getting in enough fluid, not getting in too much sugar and added salt and those types of things. But anyway, I digress. There's no one kidney stone diet for all, but people always ask, Melanie, what's the best diet for kidney stones? And I think if you really force me into a corner, that is what I would say. I would say a pescatarian diet that's very, very focused on sort of whole plant foods with some fish that also gets in some dairy from time to time. But anyway, I digress. Let's dive into why a vegetarian or vegan diet are good for kidney stones. Because I think so often we think, oh gosh, a vegetarian or vegan diet means I have to eat tons of beans, means I have to eat all of these vegetables. They have so much oxalate. Clearly, this is a disaster for people with kidney stones. And if that is you and you are having that initial reaction, I would definitely encourage you to go back and review some of my previous episodes about why I strongly do not recommend a strict low oxalate diet for kidney stone prevention, because fruits and vegetables and beans, nuts, seeds, plant proteins, right, all these foods that are restricted severely on a low oxalate diet are actually really good for you for a lot of the reasons that we're going to go into in this episode today. Yes, they have oxalate in them, but we know time and time again, people who eat more plant foods, people who eat more fruit, more vegetables, more whole grains, more beans even, people who eat less meat tend to have fewer kidney stones again and again and again and again. And we see that again and again and again in the literature. I will link, of course, to some of those examples below in the show notes. So specifically, when I think about the benefits of a more plant-forward or vegetarian or vegan diet for kidney stones, the first thing that comes to mind is honestly just fiber. Fiber is so... I feel like fiber is having a moment, right? Isn't fiber maxing like a trend right now on TikTok or something, but I digress. Fiber, that is one TikTok trend, perhaps the only TikTok trend, nutrition TikTok trend I could ever get on board with, is fiber is so important for us for so many reasons, but specifically for kidney stones, we see that people who eat more fiber have fewer kidney stones. And there's many potential ways or mechanisms why fiber might be helping kidney stones. One way is we know that when we eat a very high fiber diet, it's just helping support a healthy gut microbiome. It's helping diversify and helping all of the little bacteria that are living in our gut live a happy, healthy life. And those bacteria have tons of benefits for us when it comes to kidney stone prevention. Most notably, they can really help with oxalate degradation, or they can help our bodies kind of break down some of that oxalate so that oxalate doesn't end up in our bodies from the healthy foods that we eat. They can also help reduce inflammation via producing these things called short chain fatty acids, which in turn could potentially help prevent the formation of kidney stones. And there's all sorts of stuff, right? But we certainly know that fiber is good for us generally, right? We know people who eat more fiber tend to have less cancer, tend to have less diabetes, tend to have less heart disease, tend to have basically all of the scary chronic health conditions that we are worried about in this country. And eating more fiber helps literally all of them, right? So I think that certainly that is a huge benefit, because fiber exclusively comes from plant foods, right? Fiber only comes from fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, essentially, and beans, nuts, seeds, right? Like other of these plant foods. You will not find fiber in meat or chicken or fish or dairy. Not that you can't eat those foods, obviously, but like fiber exclusively comes from these plant foods. And when most of the foods that you're eating are from plants, right? Like a vegetarian or vegan diet, you're obviously going to be way more likely to get more fiber in. Another huge benefit of a more plant-forward diet is getting a lot of potassium. Certainly, if you are listening to this episode and you have chronic kidney disease, I would go back and listen to my previous episode about potassium and your kidneys in general. That's episode 111 of the podcast, so a couple months ago. Because I think when we start adding chronic kidney disease to this conversation, then potassium is a little bit more complex. However, even if you do have chronic kidney disease, everything I'm about to say certainly applies to you. We know that eating more potassium is really, really good for a variety of things, most notably your kidneys, ironically, as well as helping to control blood pressure and also prevent kidney stones. And potassium mostly comes in a lot of fruits and vegetables. And we know that getting more of that in is going to be beneficial for a lot of reasons. I also want to back up a little bit, since I'm talking about heart health so much, I feel like in this episode so far, is that I think it's important to mention that people who have kidney stones are at higher risk, unfortunately, of things like heart disease and high blood pressure. And so whenever I'm thinking about kidney stone nutrition, I'm not just thinking about kidney stone prevention. Like, obviously that's my number one, you know me, right? But I care about everything in your body, including your heart. And I just always like to mention that, people with kidney stones are unfortunately at greater risk for these other things. And so I think it's really important to mention that getting in all these other things is really, really good for your general health and the prevention of these other health conditions, right? The next thing that fruits and vegetables and vegetarian diets are going to be super rich in that is beneficial for kidney stones is something called alkali. So whenever I go into this topic, it always gets very, very complicated, and I feel like I lose people, so bear with me. So the food that we eat produces either acid, meat, FYI, meat, fish, poultry, chicken, fish, etc., produces acid, or alkali, which is the opposite of acid, and alkali or base, right? That's another word for it. And this is not the food itself, right? Like beef, for example, is not acidic itself. Like if you take a piece of steak, it's not acidic. But when you consider what happens when your body metabolizes that steak, which is really all we care about, right, from a whole health standpoint, meat and poultry, fish, chicken, etc., produce acid, whereas fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, seeds all produce alkali or base. And so when we think about this dietary acid load situation, we really, for kidney health, whether we're talking about kidney disease or kidney stones, we really want to be eating more of this alkali producing stuff to help balance some of that acid producing stuff we're eating, as well as potentially reducing some of that acid stuff that we're producing, aka meat, right? And so when you are eating a no meat diet, you're obviously not getting those higher acid producing foods, and you're getting a lot more of these alkali or plant producing foods. And as a general rule, that is real real good for kidney stone prevention because it's going to help balance essentially acid levels in your urine. You're less likely to have a low urine pH or too much acid in your urine. And you're also way more likely to have more citrate in your urine, which we know is a really potent inhibitor of calcium-based kidney stones. And so really getting in all of these fruits and vegetables is really helping to balance this acid level in your urine as much as possible, if that makes sense. So that's another benefit. Another thing to think about is, we talk about protein in kidney stone world a lot, and we say, like a high protein diet is bad for kidney stones. And I would say, if in a super simplified statement, yes, that is true. However, as many things in health and nutrition, there's a lot of nuance there. We know that plant protein, so protein that comes from beans, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and dairy, so milk, yogurt, cheese, etc., that protein doesn't cause the harmful changes in your urine that predispose you to kidney stones like animal protein does, other than dairy. Dairy is that one exception. Let me say that again. So plant protein from beans, nuts, seeds, there's nothing about that protein that makes me worried about forming kidney stones, whereas protein from meat and poultry and fish, seafood, etc., that protein could potentially be harmful when you're eating too much of it, right? And so when we think about a vegetarian or plant-based diet where most or all of your protein is coming from plant protein, that doesn't scare me at all, right? Because that protein does not seem to be harmful. There's not a shred of evidence that I'm aware of that shows that a higher protein diet, when that protein is coming from plants, is harmful. Really, the only thing with protein that we care about is in the guidelines, they call it non-dairy animal protein. We want to make sure we're not eating too much of non-dairy animal protein when you have low levels of citrate, too much urine calcium, and most of the common risk factors for kidney stones. And so really these plant proteins are demonized because they just tend to have oxalate in them, right? When I say plant proteins, I'm thinking beans, nuts, seeds, whole grains, nut seeds, right? These foods happen to have oxalate, but when you look at who actually forms stones and who doesn't, people who eat more of these plant proteins, especially in place of meat, tend to have fewer kidney stones. And so I see this as a huge benefit for a vegetarian or vegan diet. Another benefit is magnesium. So I have a great blog post about magnesium, which I will link to if you want to read up on this more. But I wanted to mention that certainly a vegetarian diet would have more magnesium on average, I would say, than sort of your average standard American diet. Magnesium is found in leafy green vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds. I imagine you're sensing a theme. And magnesium is a really good inhibitor of oxalate-based stones. And so eating more of these healthy foods that happen to have more magnesium in them is also a benefit in my mind when it comes to stone prevention. Another thing is fluid, right? Certainly we know that drinking a lot of water is really good for kidney stones, of course, but we also get a fair amount of fluid from the foods that we eat. And fluid comes mostly from fruits and vegetables. And so if we're eating more fruits and vegetables, we're also getting that extra fluid from those things as well, right? So that's kind of another benefit. And studies have actually shown that urine volumes are higher in people who consume a more plant-based diet because of that extra fluid likely coming from those fruits and vegetables. So that's pretty cool too. Also, I think that if done healthfully, a vegetarian or vegan diet can be much lower in sodium. I always have to kind of give that caveat because certainly we all know those vegetarians who live off of pasta and cheese. Nothing wrong with pasta and cheese, obviously, but we probably want to get a little bit more diversity and maybe a little bit more fruits and vegetables in there. But I do think that if it's done in a healthful way, this vegetarian or vegan diet is, I would even hesitate to say more likely to be lower in sodium, but I think it definitely can be lower in sodium, which is obviously really, really beneficial for kidney stone prevention. I think the one huge challenge that arises when someone is wanting or does follow a vegetarian or vegan diet is calcium, especially if you are vegan, because obviously if you are vegan, you are not consuming cheese or milk or yogurt. And that calcium is so critical, especially for people who might be following a more plant-forward diet, because inevitably, by following a more plant-forward diet, it does likely have more oxalate in it. However, that is okay for the vast majority of people if we just make sure to get in that calcium, because we know, of course, that when we consume adequate calcium, that significantly reduces how much oxalate gets absorbed from the food and from the healthy foods that we eat, because calcium can block oxalate oxalate absorption in the gut, in the intestines. And so in my experience, I've never seen a vegan form kidney stones unless they were completely neglecting this aspect of calcium, right? I have definitely seen many vegans form kidney stones, but that is because they are not getting enough calcium. And so that is why that calcium piece is so critical. And especially for vegan patients, that can be more challenging, just because obviously we're not getting milk, which is such an easy, plentiful, delicious way to get in calcium. So for vegetarians, let me kind of break up this conversation into two groups. So if you're vegetarian and you do consume milk or dairy, then great, right? That's fine. We can get in that calcium. That's very easy. My recommendations for you would be the same as everyone else. Get in those 2 to 3 servings of dairy a day with meals. That's going to 99% of the time be plenty to block whatever oxalate happens to be in your healthy diet that's packed with all these wonderfully healthy foods for kidney stones as well as general health. If you are vegan, obviously this doesn't work. And I do recommend for most people who are vegan, who have oxalate-based kidney stones, to utilize those plant-based milk substitutes, right? So we're talking about soy milk or almond milk. Yes, those things happen to have a little bit more oxalate in it, but it's really not that much at the end of the day. And that calcium is just so stinking important. I want to get it in you somehow to be blocking reducing the oxalate absorption from all those super healthy foods that you're eating. But there's also, if the oxalate in soy and almond milk scares you, then there's like a zillion other options. I actually have a blog post about that too. I'll link to that as well. You can do like an oat milk. I feel like that's very popular these days, and that's a really healthy, there's some hate out there, but it really is a perfectly nutritious, wonderful option that I really feel like tastes the most like milk. It's kind of like creamier like milk is. So I think oat milk can be a great option. I think coconut milk can be a great option. I think there's rice milk. I feel like that's sort of like your standard old school version. You can find like pea milk. You can find macadamia nut milk. Like there's so many different options. So definitely check out that blog post if you do want to utilize some of these plant-based milk substitutes. And I do recommend that vegans utilize these things as opposed to, people often say, well, Melanie, like there's calcium in kale and there's calcium in beans. And yes, that is totally true. That is not wrong. However, the amount in there is so much smaller than, say, a glass of milk. Plus that, unfortunately, the calcium that's in those foods isn't quite as well utilized because of, ironically, the oxalate that happens to be in those foods. And so I see all of that calcium as like bonus calcium, and I'm all about it. That's great. But that's, again, that calcium is so critically important for people with any calcium-based kidney stone. I want to be 1000% sure that we are getting that in. And so for vegan patients, I do recommend the plant-based milk substitutes whenever possible, just because I really want to be getting in that calcium. Of course, the question always comes up, what about calcium supplements? We do not recommend supplements for the vast majority of patients. There certainly are exceptions, but for most people with stones, we don't want to be taking calcium supplements because calcium supplements are associated with a higher risk of kidney stones in some studies, whereas getting adequate calcium from actual food is associated with a much lower risk. Even that one change, for the record, can lower your risk of oxalate stones by 50%, like just getting in that calcium. Like that is how incredibly important it is to be getting in that calcium. And so that is why I'm spending so much of this episode talking about calcium, because it's so important, especially if you are following a very healthy, nutritious, more plant-forward diet, which I want you to be doing as a vegetarian, or excuse me, I'm not a vegetarian, but as a dietitian who cares about your health. I care that you are eating all of these really helpful foods that just happen to have oxalate in them, but that's okay because the benefits of all of these super healthy plant-forward foods are immense. I just spent like 17 minutes outlining all of the great benefits. However, they do come with oxalate, and so we have to be mindful of that, and we do that primarily by getting in adequate calcium. So all of this being said, maybe I've even convinced you that I think you should be vegetarian in this episode. And so I wanted to kind of transition to the end of this episode by saying that you certainly do not have to be a vegetarian. I mentioned, I disclosed already that I am not vegetarian myself. However, I do try to get in fruits and vegetables and whole grains, and the oxalate content in foods doesn't scare me. I would say I follow more of like as much as possible, possible, like a sort of DASH or Mediterranean style diet, which I recommend all the time. That does absolutely include some animal proteins, but also it includes lots of plant proteins as well. I'm not eating meat necessarily every single day or every single meal. I'm making sure I'm getting in my whole grains and fruits, vegetables, and dairy to help all of this, kind of fall into place. So that being said, you certainly do not have to be vegetarian, but you can be. A lot of people come to me and say, Melanie, like, I love this vegan diet. I love this vegetarian diet. Do I have to give it up? And I would say absolutely not. In fact, I think that's actually really, really good for you. Instead, let's work with your urine test to see what exactly is driving that stone formation. Because, I just talked a lot about how, these diets tend to have a lot of oxalate, but even for vegetarian or vegan patients, a lot of times urine oxalate isn't even what's driving that stone formation. A lot of times there's something else going on. And so I would say you don't have to give up that vegetarian or vegan diet. In fact, I would encourage you to continue it because it has all of these wonderful benefits. We just have to modify it to make it a little bit more kidney stone friendly for you based on your urine risk factors, which is true of anyone, right? Like ultimately, no matter what we're talking about, we need to personalize whatever prevention we're doing, whether it's from a nutrition or medical standpoint, to your 24-hour urine risk factors, right? Your 24-hour urine test. Because without that test, we truly have no idea why you are forming stones. And any changes that we make, whether it's taking a medication, eating less salt, cutting out oxalate, whatever it is, we have no idea if that's even targeting why you're making stones. So I always like to say that if you are making any sort of change in your life with the intention of preventing kidney stones and you don't have that 24-hour urine test, you're literally just guessing. Like literally we have no idea, right? So that's so critical. And as always, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about how I use those 24-hour urine tests to help my students and patients prevent stones, definitely check out my free webinar if you haven't already. If you just head to kidneystoneclass.com, you can sign up for a time that works for you, and you can learn a little bit more about how I help people prevent stones in my course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. Truly, like, it has helped hundreds of people prevent stones. I get an email practically daily from previous students saying, oh, just got back from a scan. I don't have new stones, or my stones haven't gotten any bigger, or my doctor says I don't need to see him anymore because my 24-hour urine test looks so good, or I haven't formed a stone in years, right? Because it really matters, right? That personalization is so important. And I think when we go into the realm of vegetarian or vegan diets, perhaps even more important, because people always assume that you're forming stones because of the spinach. And I will tell you, 95% of the time, it's not the spinach. Unless you are eating insanely large amounts of spinach and not getting in that calcium and not consuming sort of a healthy, varied, well-balanced diet, then we get into problems. A lot of other problems other than just kidney stones. But we really have to look at your test. We cannot make assumptions based on your medical history or based on your dietary pattern, right? Why you're making stones. We need to get at that urine test. We need to know why you're forming stones, what your risk factors are. And from there, we can come up with a personalized plan to prevent stones for you. Also, I think one of the big benefits of this sort of personalized approach to kidney stone prevention is it means you don't have to do everything, right? I think people get so frustrated because they feel like, oh my gosh, I can't eat salt, protein, sodium. I have to drink all this water. I have to get in all this milk, right? Like there's so many things going on. You probably don't have to think about all of them, right? Like when we know when we know what's going on with you, we can target what's going on with you, right? And focus on that risk factor and focus on just the changes that are going to make the biggest impact for you, right? And that makes it a lot easier and probably more effective in the long run than trying to do everything all at once, because that's just really, really hard. We know that diet change is hard. And as a dietitian, I am all about finding the least restrictive diet that will work for you, that will prevent kidney stones for you, to help you still enjoy life and enjoy eating and make this as easy as possible for you. So if any of that resonated with you, please do check out that webinar. At kidneystoneclass.com. You can sign up for a time that works for you to learn a little bit more about my approach to kidney stone prevention in my course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. So with that, I will end this episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I hope that was helpful for those of you who are vegetarian or vegan, or who are perhaps interested in becoming a vegetarian or vegan. I think that these are wonderful dietary patterns that can absolutely fit with kidney stone prevention, and in fact could be super beneficial beneficial for most people. So as always, I like to give the reminder that if you would like to ask a question for me to tackle on the podcast, I would love to hear from you. If you head to kidneystonepodcast.com, you can record that question for a chance to be answered on the podcast by me. So happy Wednesday. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more help with kidney stones, check out my website, www.thekidneydietitian.org. For more personalized help from me, check out my online course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. VIP enrollment includes help directly from me. I can't wait to see you there and help you prevent kidney stones. Have a great day.